Hi, I'm Kristel. I'm the National Director for Arosha Aotearoa New Zealand. So Arosha is a faith-based conservation organisation. We're involved in practical community-based conservation and education. We sit on two sides really, where we work in the conservation movement as well as working with churches and Christian communities to care for God's earth. It's a great space to work in, and we really love being, in a community long term, connecting around what those communities need and listening to what people need within those communities. And we do this throughout the world. We've got Arosha bases in 20 places around the world. Many of them have field study centres, and many of them also deal with big issues around poverty and social justice, because in places where many of our poor live, that's also the places where we have huge environmental issues. And Arosha's aim is to address both the environmental issues as well as the social issues, and create opportunities for people to restore and improve their environments, as well as provide income and a means of living justly on the land. So in New Zealand, Arosha's we've got local groups around the country that are run by volunteers and are involved in conservation projects in their local neighbourhoods. And we also have a flagship project which is at Karioi, Mount Karioi in Raglan, where we're restoring biodiversity from the mountain to the sea. What that looks like is that we have a large-scale predator control program, which addresses issues of invasive species, obviously, which is a big issue in New Zealand. And we have a large seabird restoration program and monitoring program. So we have these amazing seabirds called grey-faced petrel, or oi, that come to our coastline and are hugely vulnerable because they come to breed and they sit in these burrows, and they're hugely vulnerable to stoats and rats and cats and dogs. And these birds lay an egg, and once the egg is hatched, this tiny cute little chick sits in that burrow from about July, August till December before it fledges. And so it's hugely vulnerable to those predators as the parents go out to sea and come back to feed it every week or two. And so part of our program is that we wrap around and protect these burrows, but at the same time, all the work we do also protects our native forest birds. And part of our program is also not only that we do the conservation stuff, but we do education work. So we have an education program both within the Raglan Area School and other local schools around the area. And we have an after-school environmental program as well, where kids get to come and explore nature and learn all kinds of things in a really fun and interactive way. So the God moments for me are very much about just seeing people connect to nature. I think that is our inspiration, and in order for people to really care about the environment and nature or God's creation, I think you need that connection, and you need to have that moment where you connect with nature and you're inspired by it. And I think when people care for nature and connect with nature, they want to look after it. And I think that needs to be our first step as we call people to care for God's earth, is that they have that connection. And that can be a really faith-based connection, but for many people that might look also slightly differently. But it's a place where we can all come together and we can all do our bit, and in whatever way that you're inspired. So a real moment for me is when I get that chance to connect. I think for me, water is really important. Just being, near water or immersed in water is a big deal. I'm a surfer, I'm a swimmer, so I love being on and in the water. And I think that's why it's really special kind of living here on the coast and being able to work in a coastal forest area, working with seabirds, Also, even though, wildlife is not necessarily there for us to touch or hold, often we're just observing it. But there are those moments for me where I'm working with wildlife, handling seabirds, or any other animal that I've worked with during my career, whether it be insects or crabs or mammals. All those species are special, and having an opportunity to sometimes touch or interact or work with them is probably, those are the God moments for me. So definitely interaction with species. And probably another moment is, it really reminds me where that word "be still and know that I am God," and it's those moments of silence where there is no human-induced noise. It's when we can truly be silent and just hear nature and hear birds calling, or hear the animals roaring, or just the sound of the wind in the trees. I think for me that those are the real God moments, and where I really connect with nature and feel a real peace. Probably many of you can relate to this, but for me, I was the real nature kid. Everything I wanted to do was outdoors. It's where I had my adventures. It's where I could connect and play with animals. I loved exploring beaches and estuaries and collecting crabs. Playing on my friends' farms, playing with the animals, looking at the animals, playing in the hay barns, and just so many places to explore. And whether it be cold, snowy, I was in the Netherlands when we could still make snowmen in the backyard, or in the summer on the beach, or in a stream, or visiting waterfalls. I mean, it was just endless opportunities for adventure. And that's a place where I connected with nature. I was drawn to it, and as I grew up, that love for nature grew into wanting to know more about it. I studied nature. I started off as a farmer, and then became a biologist. And as you learn more and know more, that love for nature led to wanting to protect it and care for it and look after it. And as I kind of explored my faith, I guess my God moments, those first God moments for me were connecting to nature. That's where I felt there's something bigger out there. And then as I explored my Christian faith, there was a moment, I think I was a teenager, and I was sitting in church, and someone literally said, there are no, dogs in heaven, or dogs aren't going to get there. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, maybe I don't want to go there either. For me, it was very much like the idea of heaven, or whatever that might be, was very much included animals. It included this amazing creation that God had provided for us. And that's how I imagined heaven to be. That, He has already given us a template of His amazing creativity and this amazing world and place that He's created is a reflection of who God is for me. I think there was a period in my life where I felt very confused. I didn't see, within the church, I didn't see a care for creation. Personally, I went to church and it felt, if you could sing or dance or play a guitar or an instrument, there was something there that you could do and that you could contribute. I couldn't do any of those things. I'm a terrible singer. And for me, I would sing, when I'm walking on the beach, when no one can hear me. But that's where I wanted to sing. That's where that God connection came in again. So there was, definitely a moment, or some moments of tension for me where I think, in general, people would just, even comment or say, oh, Kristel, if you weren't a Christian, you'd be such a hippie. And to me, I felt we should all be Christian hippies. There was a place for us to care for God's earth, and that was part of what we were called to do. And yeah, the message of, that it was all, not important, whatever was, on earth as it is in heaven to me meant, however we imagine heaven, it was already here on earth, and it was here for us to care for it. And I had to reconcile myself to that and say, hey, this is important stuff, and I need to explore that more and what that means for me. I feel when we talk about the Lord's Prayer and on earth as it is in heaven, that we are asked to demonstrate, to take care of this world and each other, because we are all part of nature, in the way that we would imagine that happening in heaven. So what we imagine we will do in future or in the afterlife, or is what we should be doing right here on earth today. For me, my whole being and purpose in life was connected to God's creation, and so I had to really question and ask myself, what does all this mean to me? And one day I was sitting out the back of the surf on my surfboard, and water around me, and it was a beautiful day, and I was just kind of really questioning kind of what does this mean? Where do I go with all this, and do I even keep going with all this? Because it felt like a bit of a struggle sometime, and it was hard work, in those early days, especially when we first started A Rocha. And I had a real sense of this word in my head saying it matters to me. And it was 4 very simple words, but they meant a lot, and I've kind of hung on to that. It's not even so much about what we do or a list of things that we need to do, but it's remembering that we're called to do it, and that God says it matters to me, and so everything we do makes a difference and matters to Him, and that is our true purpose in this life, is that we do what matters to God. I think in the doing and in recognizing the purpose of what we're doing, that God reconciles Himself to us. That there's a sense of, and I see it in the communities we work in, is that despite the struggles and the relationships and everything that goes and is part of working in community, is there is a process of reconciliation, and there's a brokenness that's there, that's healed, and I think that's kind of, to me, that's God's heart. It's reconciliation, and it brings a sense of hope and wonder and appreciation for each other and for all created beings. So a lot of people ask, what can we do? And for me, it really starts off as saying, hey, taking care of God's creation is active worship. So that's a great start, is like really just connecting, getting out into nature and seeing what inspires you and where do you feel called. So I'm always reluctant to give a list, but of course there are many, many things that you can get involved in, and I know a lot of Christians will perhaps want to work through their church networks or within their churches to kind of create change as well. So for A Rocha, there's 2 ways to get involved. We have our practical conservation and education programs that are locally based, but some of them are national programs. We have programs for youth to get involved in wilderness journeys and other local activities with local groups around the country. But if you're keen to get something going in your own community or in your own local church, we do have a program called the Eco Church program, which we just launched this year. And on our website, there's a whole range of great activities, but also great stories of people and churches that are already doing great stuff around the country. So it could be anything from looking at a zero waste program to doing different types of services and implementing different practices and looking at different principles. Like, so you might take on a zero waste principle, or a improving, you know, how you use energy, or how you might manage your buildings, or how you might transport yourself to and from church, or to and from work, or whatever space you live in. So there's not just a list of activities, but also, you know, there's some principles that you could look at that might encompass a whole range of activities that you will look at incorporating into your lifestyle, but also your decision making. And some of them are very much around, you know, long-term sustainability, and things will change over time as well as we learn more about how to do things better. But then there's also just great ways of getting involved in nature, you know, not only through our local group programs, but also you might join a forest and bird group, or another local community conservation project, a stream restoration project, or a planting project that you can get involved in your local community. And it's a great place to network, to connect with others, and to connect with your local community, and share this message of hope. For Arosha, there's in places like Kenya, where I spend a bit of time, there was a strong emphasis on addressing social justice and poverty issues. So our programs connected in with providing environmental education, which reduced stress and pressures on forest ecosystems or coastal ecosystems. And then the funding that was raised was then provided for children to attend school, because people often destroy the environment because they want to make money. And so they addressed the, you know, practices like that might, you know, like deforestation, and instead found alternative ways for families to make money, and then the money that was collected was then used for education purposes for those children to go to school. So it was kind of, you know, improving environment, but also improving the lives of those people in those communities. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that, you know, we're much more disconnected in New Zealand from our local environment. Like, we can go to the supermarket and get pretty much anything we need. But in places like Africa or Kenya or in Asia, you know, for people there, their local estuary is their supermarket. Their local river is the place where they get their water from. It's their pharmacy, you know, it's their food supply, yeah, they are much more connected to the environment than we are in a way, and also much more vulnerable when those environments degrade and become unsustainable for their livelihoods. And you see that there very much, you know, as deforestation and if impacts on climate. And then, you know, you get desertification, so, you know, like, people can't grow their crops anymore, and there's real drought and poverty associated with that. So it's yeah, it becomes much more apparent. But in the same way, in New Zealand, like, we have our own kind of poverty, where disconnection from nature is creates a disconnect of, you know, why we need to care for nature and why it's so important to us. And that's why I'm so passionate about restoring biodiversity. Because without biodiversity, our ecosystems cannot function anymore. And when, you know, we live in big cities and urban environments where we're disconnected from nature, we forget how important it is. And so for all of us, here, it's just as important to reconnect and rethink, you know, how we gather our food, where we purchase from, and how we live our lives, so that we too can be more sustainable in the long term. So here at Karioi, we've worked in partnership with our local hapu It's very much been a long-term journey to kind of recognise local needs, creating job opportunities and opportunities for people in Hapu to work on their own land. And that's an ongoing relationship and process, and we're continuously working to explore how we can better facilitate that or support that. But most of that is also just about allowing others to take a lead, to be involved, and perhaps to hand over in the long term to those people on the land that care for it, for mana whenua, to take over and lead those projects. So it's a long-term vision for us to support what's happening here and to be a partner in whatever direction that people want to take the project. It's not our project to own. We've been gifted an opportunity to work alongside our community, and yeah, there's a time and a place for everything. So we very much continue to explore how we can best do that, how to increase opportunities for people to engage with the project, both in a employment capacity as well as volunteers. And another way that we try and really build that up is by working with young people within the school. So we have a program called the Manakiawa program, which is an earth care program where we get students out in an outdoor classroom, engaging with our local environment, engaging in things like predator trapping, but also looking at other issues around zero waste or composting and how we can do those things better, and looking at issues, environmental issues, but also opportunities for social enterprise, so that our students are motivated to get involved with environmental work as they leave school and graduate and go off and find jobs. And I guess one of our little success stories has been that we've been able to employ some of the students that we've had, within our school programs, and we've been able to employ them and see them thrive and get out into the bush and do the work with us, and that's definitely been a real highlight. I think it's really just like Indigenous cultures recognise that the biblical Hebrew has no word for nature as a separate realm from human beings. So there's no distinction between humans and other creatures. So for us, it's really important to recognise that we are very much part of nature. We all intricately linked and connected, and by restoring nature, people are very much a part of that, and there is that process of reconciliation that perhaps we need to recognise sometimes that we've taken too much, and there's an opportunity to give back, and that is true reconciliation for me, and it also gives us a really great message of hope. I think one of the highlights has been basically our seabird population here. Like, seabirds are incredibly unique, and New Zealand is the seabird capital of the world, so we have so many seabirds here, but no one actually ever gets to see them, because most of them breed on offshore islands and are out at sea feeding. And so the amazing thing here was just that we had this remnant population of seabirds that would come in. I mean, they're long-term breeders, so once a chick fledges, it doesn't come back for about another 5 to 7 years until it starts breeding itself. And we had this remnant population of seabirds coming in and attempting to breed, and basically everything that attempted to breed would end up dying or being attacked by predators, or the chick would die on the nest. So it was pretty devastating when we found those sites and then realised, gosh, nothing's surviving. A highlight for us has been that in the last 3 years we've been able to do enough of the work to see seabird chicks survive. And so that is, for us, the ultimate conservation outcome, is that we can, literally on people's doorsteps, underneath their spa pools, in their backyards, we have these seabirds landing in their back, at their back door, making a nest and having that chick survive and fledge and go off again. And 6 or 7 years later, that chick comes back. and to start its own family. So that has definitely been a highlight for us as a message of hope, is that when people are willing and the community comes together and works together, we're able to achieve small success stories like that.
There's this really cool quote that we love to use, and it's by John Muir, who says, like, when you tug at a single thread in nature, you'll find it connected to the rest of the world. And I love that quote. It just reminds me that we're not separate from nature, but we're a part of nature. And I guess when I'm lucky enough to get a chance to go out in the bush for my job, I spend way too much time behind my desk these days. But just sitting here in the bush and like tui are going crazy and these little fantails popping around, it just kind of reminds me that we're a part of nature. We're not disconnected, and nature needs us, but we need nature as well. The reason I'm really passionate about preserving biodiversity is because without biodiversity, our ecosystems are less able to function. They become stressed and less able to regulate themselves. And so we need biodiversity. It provides stability for our climate, stability for our habitats and the species that live there.